Welcome, everyone, to our 10th Office Shock Talk. Today, we are going to be speaking about the spectrum of agility. And I'm very excited to once again have my co-author, Bob Johansen, who has written a few books about the topic of agility. And we're really excited to be able to have a conversation with Professor of Leadership and Cultural Studies at the U.S. Army War College, Chuck Allen. The topic of agility has been around for many years, so we're really excited to be able to learn from Chuck, drawing on some of Bob's works as well, to really unpack what is in the spectrum of agility. What are the choices in face of office shock that individuals, organizations, and community and policymakers might be considering in order to increase the levels of agility in the face of the shocks of the last few years and which will be continuing. We are going to be also looking into what are some of the ways that we might actually take the word agility and make it something operational. And that's where I think both Chuck and Bob are going to have some wonderful insights. As a reminder, this is our 7th spectrum. The book Office Shock, which was released exactly 6 weeks ago, contains 6 other spectrums: the spectrum of purpose, the spectrum of outcomes, the spectrum of climate impacts, the spectrum of belonging, the spectrum of augmentation, which is what we spoke about last night when we had a conversation with the Office Shock bot, the spectrum of place and time, and bringing it all together is the spectrum of agility. As we get started, I'd love for all of the participants to write in the chat, how do you define agility? Agility has been around. Many of us have seen it overused, a bit of a buzzword, but it is fundamental in helping organizations navigate the changes that are happening in what we know as a VUCA world, and we're going to speak about that as well. What I'd like to do is, Bob, you've been working with Chuck for so long, and I'd love to get your bit of a historical perspective as a way to introduce Chuck before we jump into the conversation.
Sure. Great. Good to see you, Joseph, and good to see you again, Chuck. This is going to be a conversation of bridging the lessons Chuck has learned in a military world, bridging the lessons that Joseph and I have learned in more of a business or nonprofit or government world. I just happened to be at the U.S. Army War College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, the week before 9/11. And I met Chuck. I'm not a military guy by background, but this experience, and Chuck in particular, changed my life, introduced me to this concept of the VUCA world, which we're going to talk about in some detail. And I started bringing senior executives there. I was with a group of senior Deloitte partners and CEOs. And now, since then, we've had more than 15 of these gatherings where we bring senior executives there and we seminar about leadership and lessons. And I've learned so much. I think the military is clearly ahead of us in business in some ways. We're ahead of them in other ways. And that's essentially what we want to talk about today. So great to see you again, Chuck, and over to you, Joseph. Let's talk.
Yeah, so maybe we can start. Chuck, love to hear your views of the VUCA world and really setting the context for why agility is so important for the future, for what's coming next, and also for what's now.
Well, thank you, Joseph, for having me here. And it's good to see my longtime friend, Bob. So, well, I'm glad to have you back on my screen, and we'll continue this dialogue and conversation for a while. So I think I'll start off with this idea of what the strategic environment might be. As any individual organization, you'll scan the environment to see what's around you and what things that you should be paying attention to. And so back in the 1990s, early on, the United States military and the Army War College were looking at the environment of the future into the 21st century. And as they came back with their assessment, they decided that there was 4 major characteristics of the strategic environment. I want to use the acronym of VUCA: V for volatile, U for uncertain, C for complex, and A for ambiguous. We said the environment characteristics were of VUCA in that we had a high rate of change in information flow. That's the volatility. That we were not able to predict with certainty outcomes and events. So that's kind of the youthful uncertainty. That the world was very much interconnected and we had interdependencies we had a hard time imagining. So the complexity comes into place. And then as we interpret information and data and we think about it, our interpretation may be different than someone else or foggy. It may be ambiguous. So given those characteristics of the strategic environment, the VUCA, we challenge our leaders to figure out again how they can be competent and navigate that environment and that landscape. So Bob Johansen did a very good job in a couple of his books, providing a counter to the landscape of VUCA, but by providing us some skills that leaders need to have in order to navigate that landscape. So when you have that volatility and the high rate of change and information overload, it maybe requires a vision. Can you see beyond the turmoil and the turbulence to what is possible of a future you want to be able to create? When you have that uncertainty and ability maybe not to predict things, it may require a greater degree of clarity of what we're trying to accomplish. So when you see through the fog, what are we trying to establish? Clarity. Well, it means you have to understand the environment that you're in. You have to study the people who are around you. You have to study yourself. You have to study your customers and clients. So VU, volatile and uncertainty, V, vision and understand. And then with that complexity, it really requires, again, a clarity of purpose, what you're trying to accomplish. And then for me, I added an additional C to Bob's VUCA. Sorry about this, Bob. Communication. What's your self-talk in your own mind so you know what you're thinking and why? How do you communicate that to your stakeholders who are going to support you and provide resources? And how do you communicate within your organization so that the leaders, members, and organizational engines know how and why to move forward? And if you have that ambiguity in terms of data, it requires, again, a acceptance that you may not have the answer. You're not smart enough or wise enough expertise. You may need other people around you to step in and fill in the gaps. So that requires an agility, the ability to recognize your shortfalls or what you don't know, the ability to look to others for what they might bring to you, and the ability to learn very, very quickly. That learning means not only adaptation, but also being proactive and creating conditions so you can achieve that vision that we all understand. We can speak with clarity to now learn and be successful in our organizations.
Very helpful, very helpful. I'm really curious to pick up on the term you used, Chuck, situational environment. And Bob, when we started writing, you were pretty insistent about the importance of including VUCA. Love to hear a little bit about why you see our current situational environment in the face of what we came to call office shock as a warranting the use of the term VUCA.
Yeah, and I think so much of being a good futurist is to set your expectations, and if you get your expectations right, it helps you prepare. And sort of in the military context, they talk about things like wargaming, and the design of war games, as I understood them, is to be harder than real warfare. So you're trying to prepare yourself for what you're actually going to encounter without actually being able to predict what you're going to encounter. So I've used the VUCA term a lot, the negative VUCA, with businesses and with nonprofits to kind of set up expectations, what you can prepare for. And there's variations. Our colleague Jermaine Cascio talks about the Banny world, and that's actually even a little more accurate. But I think VUCA is enough, and VUCA is now become common language in many business environments. So it gets you started without worrying about the details, but it prepares you. It prepares you to be surprised.
And I guess to be ready for those surprises, that's where agility comes in. So,
Mhm.
Chuck, love to get your perspectives and to try to unpack what really does agility mean, to really cut through the, in many cases, overuse of the word, particularly when we think about agile training and agile methodologies for software development. So love to hear a little bit more about what agile is and how might it help us do, as you recommend, Bob, to help us prepare for this future world, or what we're calling office show.
I think maybe agility has gotten a bad rap because of some of the kind of the loose use of the word agility. It may mean, in some folks' mind, flexibility. Again, this idea you're always shifting, you're moving very quickly, and you're kind of blowing in the wind. But for me, agility is about learning, looking at the environment that's around you. Your actions has some intentionality behind it. If the environmental conditions are not able to be navigated by you and your skill set that you have, what is missing? What did you not see? What don't you know? And so the being openness here again that you might be wrong, be able to question your assumptions, and then when you get new information, how do you now make a decision to do something differently? What have you learned? And my expression I use with my students repeatedly is that we have lots of lesson learned documents and books and in courses within the organizations. And we'll find, again, is that when the same situation might occur in the future, sometimes our behavior regresses to what we did before. And so my contention many times is, I'll use my own little trope here, is that learning only happens when your behavior changes. If you go back to the same routine, absent guidance or direction, and you snap back to your past way of thinking and doing, then you haven't learned. And that is a pushback on agility. Agility should be about being very intentional, understanding the assumptions, evaluating information wherever you can, and then moving forward, and then demonstrating here again a testable hypothesis. My actions will have a very positive or intended effect in the process. So it's about learning, it's about challenging assumptions. I think agility beyond the individual means that you have to be able to enable the agility of others who are around you.
Mm.
And so if they're also agile and not relying on you to tell them what to do, and they're learning and they're changing your behavior, and they're shaping the culture, they're shaping the capabilities, they're shaping the competence of the organization, then you will have organizational agility. Ed Lawler wrote a book many years ago entitled Built to Change. So we've had again, Jim Collins talked about Built to Last. Ed Lawler came back and says, well, really, if the environment's going to shift and change, spooky that it is, how do you know that you're ready to do something different? Well, you have to be having those processes in place to assess the environment, to challenge information, to learn, but also to change your behavior. So you have to be built to change.
Now, that's very powerful. And I really do like what you said, the importance of encouraging others to be agile. And Bob, in the chapter, we brought the example of gaming, particularly for gaming, online gaming, that new generation that is growing up with gaming. We referred to esports as well. And even in the book, we referred to the importance of gameful cooperation. Tell us a little bit more about that. Really is the way to operationalize this culture and mindset, Chuck, that you're talking about agility as learning and all about change.
Right, right. And we suggest in the book that what we call video gaming today, 10 years from now, thinking future back is what we're doing, 10 years from now, that's going to be the most powerful learning medium in history, because the interfaces are so powerful, and we've got a generation of kids growing up with that, which we think is going to be a competitive advantage. And here, Chuck, I'd love to have you talk a little bit about the Army's National Training Center, which I got to visit in the Mojave Desert. And I got to think of it as the world's largest video gaming parlor, 2 weeks, 24 hours a day. But the thing that I would like you to talk about in particular is the importance of after action reviews. I remember going out on the battlefield there, and I actually got to interview the virtually dead as they were kind of doing after action reviews on flip charts out in the desert. And that notion of learning, it seems to me that links to agility in such a profound way. And the takeaway I had was that it wasn't the data from the after action review, it was the discipline, it was the practice.
Okay. Well, thank you for bringing that up. Again, the National Training Center is over in California. We actually have at least 4 now. We have one in Louisiana in Fort Polk. We have one over in Germany, and it's a brand new one in the Big Island in Hawaii. So the National Training Centers were put in place as we transitioned back in the 1990s to the force of the future. And we recognize here again is that in home station, we're not able to train under realistic conditions or operational conditions. So we created an environment, a synthetic environment, maybe a virtual environment, really on the ground to test units against their mission sets that we expect them to be able to perform in deployments. What we also found is that in order to have a effective training, you need to have a very effective and strong adversary. So we've put together an organization and organizational structure. We had a world-class, we call it opposing forces or OPFOR. We instrument the battlefield, so we're able to monitor communications, see the tracking of equipment, and also adjudicate battlefield results. And then part of that process of going through a mission set, it was generally expected that the friendly forces that went there to train up against a world-class OPFOR who knew the terrain would not be successful. And part of the process is why not successful? So we would start doing, again, we call it after action reviews. We had 3 major questions. What was supposed to happen? What actually did happen? And what should you do about it? So based on how we were designed, how we trained, and then our expectations, and then lack of success, again, in many cases early on, failure to accomplish the mission, what did we learn from that? So after every engagement, you had a session like that, an after-action review with a facilitator. You had the documentation of who said what, who turned left and who turned right, who got lost, and a walkthrough of what we should take away in terms of lessons to now change our behavior, our actions, and our decision processes for the next iteration. So the goal of the National Training Center is, again, to fail and then learn against a world-class opponent in tough conditions, and then change the mission sets around. So you have to not be certain about your outcome. You have to always be doubtful about what you're going to be able to accomplish with the team that's around you, and do that consistently. So that, again, brings the height of this organizational agility, is that when something goes wrong, and generally in our environment, something might go wrong, how do you react to it? What do you take away from it? And then how do you embed that back into the members of the organization that are responsible for the task? So we've done that in different sized units from, let's say, battalions to brigades, to about 5,000 some people. We've talked about the same type of process within our bureaucratic structure in terms of some of our processes. What do we intend to achieve? What actually happened? And where's the gaps? And then how do we adjust our processes? How do we adjust how we think? How do we adjust our engagements based upon those types of things? Again, organizational agility, but also institutional level agility.
And institutional learning, as you're describing, as there's lessons learned and insights from those after action reviews. There was a comment from Dr. Chris Perry that agility is also an assessment of the repercussions of technological change. And with that comment, I'd be curious, Chuck, to hear your experiences in transferring the after action reviews, the learning from those after reviews from the military context to a corporate context. What has been the transfer that you've seen to really work, that you're able to capture that learning agility in that context and bring it into a corporate context?
Well, Bob and I have worked with the Executive Development Roundtable out of Boston University. So a number of senior leaders, senior vice presidents for human resources, but also leader development. And we've walked them through, again, how the military, how the Army has done this. And it resonates with them. Very simply here again, what was intended, what actually happened, and then have a discussion about that. And then the ownership of the change and the learning generally leads from the higher echelons of the organization, and it gets pushed down to members who actually do the work, execute the missions. And I think part of that process, the term we use is empowerment. Are they involved in information flow? Are they involved in making decisions? And are they rewarded for their contributions? When you do an effective after-action review, you have these conversations here again, and you have that empowerment within the organization, which changes the culture, right? Mm-hmm. And then the responsibility shifts from higher in the hierarchy down to mid-level, but also at the bottom subordinate levels in process. Mm-hmm. And that resonates quite well with corporations, empowering employees, getting information, and then sometimes getting out of the way of the people who are at that point of decision and execution without the sticky hands or a long screwdriver trying to adjust from above.
Right. You know, that I'm just recalling, Chuck, we've done a number of these events, and we did one, for example, with the board of directors for United Rentals, the world's largest equipment rental company. And we did one for Rising Star Leaders at Walmart. And we've done a number of other big companies. And across all of those experiences we've had together, the big kind of surprise for the corporate folks we introduce you to, the big surprise is, whoa, I didn't realize that the Army wasn't command and control. So that notion, you don't just tell people what to do. And that was my big surprise too. I thought you were still command and control, but what you've taught me is there's a whole language around what you call commander's intent or mission command, what I call clarity. And we talk in the book about flexive intent, you know, be very clear where you're going, very flexible how you get there. But I wonder if you could talk about that. And I'm just seeing your image disappeared here. Oh, that was really interesting. Now you're back. Good. Did the lights go off automatically?
Motion sensors. I must be very passive here, sitting and not moving enough. So I'll wave my hands from time to time. We'll get this thing working for us.
It was actually very effective. If I ask you a question and then the screen goes blank and then you come back to answer the question, very effective pedagogy.
So
Chuck, Chuck, let's hear about how you use flexive intent.
So I think I go back to the kind of the stereotype that our military is very much set piece, hierarchical, and follows command and intent. As you look at the formations, it's been that way since Napoleon, how we organize ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes we figure out our organization is not effective in operations, be it peacekeeping, be it stability operations, et cetera. So we have to learn again how to adjust and adapt, or even be agile. And so we recognize here again, if you don't have physical presence, you have a large organization, it's very hard to control. And this idea of command is really about the law, but doesn't maybe work out in practice. So leaders have to delegate, devolve, and empower down below them. And so we recognize here again, the point that Bob has made repeatedly is that when you have a mission or a task at hand, well, as in any organization, you have a purpose why you exist. You have certain functions you need to execute to be successful. It requires maybe a direction that's provided by someone in the organizational hierarchy. So that becomes, again, that mission piece. And then the question comes up, what do we want to accomplish? And then what are the major pieces of that? That gives us the intent. Here's what we're trying to accomplish and why. And then you've got the organization who you've resourced and trained and enabled over time, where they're able now to determine what gets done and how things get done in the process. So you go from the intent to the execution of folks who are in the organization. We've talked before about the commanders being the number one person. I push back on this. Commander-centric organizations for me are suspect, and they are also very vulnerable. So for me, you need to push the information down as far as you can in the organization, have a clarity in terms of the purpose and then what we're trying to achieve out of the action, and then allow those members that you've trained, you select, you develop, you've empowered to get after the task at hand. So how it gets done, that goes back to the folks executing the mission. So clarity of the intent, followed by empowerment of qualified, talented people, properly motivated within our culture and our values to get things done. And I think that resonates quite a bit with us. The term flexive intent was put together by one of our colleagues, Andrew Hill, a few years ago. And even though it's not part of our official doctrine, I think it's now more and more part of our practice. Senior leaders at the high level can't control, can't know everything. So we have to devolve things down below. And at least in the United States Army, we focus now on kind of the basic unit is a squad, 8 to 10 people. Communicators, information technology, logisticians, flyers, etc. There are a lot of talent and potential out there that we should empower to do the task and the job, and they will surprise us repeatedly with their results. I think Marshall Goldsmith has said it before. Get out of the way, let them get it done, and then learn from them. Be agile.
So you've described really articulately, Chuck, the importance of, number one, having that intention, that direction, and the clarity of that intention, the importance of empowerment, and we've also talked about the importance of gainful cooperation. That's in a model that we propose in Office Shock, bringing those 3 dimensions together to try to help scaffold change in a way that embraces the importance of intent, the why and where are we going with clarity, the how are we doing it with gainful cooperation, and a bit of the who, the empowerment. Now, what's fundamental to that is, what are some of the structures that we're using? You just mentioned the word squad. We've spoken about hierarchy. We also talked about command and control. The spectrum of agility in Office Shock spans shape-shifting organizations with stable structures. And it would be very valuable to hear your insights on what are some of the key choices that you would encourage leaders, both in the military and also in the corporate space and civilian areas and communities. What are some of the choices that you think are important to be able to help find the right balance, to find the harmony between a stable structure or a structure that is well defined and something that is more shape-shifting?
What's coming to mind now as an old expression is that form should follow function. So as we think about, again, how an organization is structured, why are those pieces there? What function, what capability do they bring? And then how do we adjust and monitor that within the organization? So for us within the military, if you look at any military wiring diagram, and there's a lot of them, there's always a core structure that's documented because it's tied to resourcing. And as we see our organizations, sometimes the identity that we have is built upon those smaller structures that cascade up to a larger unit. So we can't forget about those things. It's about cohesion, individuals working together for a common purpose, and then a collective purpose for a larger institution or profession. So those things are important from the bottom up. I think what we find again is as we look at the environment that is VUCA and the terrain has changed, and your functions and your skill sets are no longer effective in that environment, what do you need to do differently? So our initial intent in most organizations is to sometimes the term we call is task organize. We'll take existing structures and then we will meld them together for another function that we're trying to develop competency in. So again, that's shape shifting, right? We're going from what a squad may be able to do combined to a platoon or a company to larger organizations. When the mission set changes, for example, we've gone through mobile training teams in Afghanistan to help train the local militias and militaries. We've done security of force assistance units, larger scale. They go to places like in Africa, who are working on internal defense and host nation support type of activities. We've shifted, again, those basic structures that we've put together, I'll say glued together in some cases, give them a new mission, and then we allow learning to happen at that level. Mm-hmm. And then take those lessons and we bring it back in the institution. Again, lessons learned sometimes is a oxymoron because we may not change their behavior. We'll take that and we should use that to now develop future doctrine, how we plan to execute things, use that to help us determine the new organizational structures that might be helpful in the future, given things that change. And then we also look at how we develop leaders and select people for those future organizations and tasks. So I think the shape shifting happens again when that environment is shifted and our skill sets are no longer valid. What do we change to?
Mm-hmm.
And then we're still recognizing that core element again is about the cohesion and identification of purpose, mission, and identity with individuals in your organization. So we've done it at a small scale within, we call it task organization within commands and units. We've done it at larger scales. In the past few years, we've put together something called Army Futures Command. We recognize here again our ability to acquire new capabilities over the out years was really suspect because we had a lot of silos and a lot of hierarchy that got in the way. We broke apart a number of different structures, put it together under a 4-star commander and said, okay, here's how we're now going to change our behavior in order to provide a better function and result for the force. So thank you again. Using structure where you need it, people, processes, and resources, and then going back to that intent. What are we here for? What are we trying to accomplish? And then how do we change? Are we built to be robust enough to change, to be effective in our future environments or the current environments?
Powerful. And I love the form follows function. Bob, you've written and researched shape-shifting organizations in both, many different contexts. Curious to hear your thoughts about what are some of the choices and also what are some of the stumbling blocks in trying to move more towards the kinds of shape-shifting organizations and agile learning that Chuck's describing.
Yes. And it's really interesting to hear the way Chuck describes the change process and moving from a more bureaucratic, more formal structure into a VUCA world and a more shape-shifting structure. It's really very parallel to these 7 spectrums of choice in Office Shock, purpose, outcomes, belonging, augmentation, time, place, and agility. They're very similar. And this isn't rocket science, but what is fresh about it is that it's an increasingly VUCA world, more VUCA than ever, and it's going to get worse. And what we're trying to bring in the Office Shock book is a future back view. And that's exactly what Army Futures Command is trying to do, to try to figure out how to move from present forward, which is so noisy. I mean, it's so noisy. But if you look future back, you can get a fresh view of, what is your clarity? What is your purpose? What is your mission? It's been striking to us since the book's come out 6 weeks ago. We called it Office Shock. We were paying homage to the great futurist Alvin Toffler in his book around 1970 called Future Shock. And we were saying it's Office Shock, but it isn't just about offices. And I think for a lot of people, the shock of COVID was too much for them. And I'm putting a lot of senior executives in this now here too, who are saying, wait a minute, COVID's winding down. We got to go back to the office. So they're setting rigid policies, in our opinion, too early. It's not just about the office. It's about officing, the way we work. It's about the office verse. And we even vary that term. So if we're talking to United Way Worldwide, which we work with now, we talk about the community verse. If we're talking to Walmart, we talk about the retail verse. If we're talking to WestRock or Borg Warner, we talk about the factory verse. So there's a verse, which is this archipelago of possibility, which is now becoming possible. And buildings in person is still an important, vital part of that. But it's the overall structure has to be more shape-shifting. So that's why I think this dialogue between you all in the military and us in business and the nonprofit world, it's so important because nobody knows yet. And it's going to take roughly 5 to 10 years to settle down, if it settles down. So this office verse is going to be in flux a long time. And we have to be really careful not to be rigid in our command structures right now, not to say, okay, it's all over, we're hybrid and done. That's a very dangerous position right now.
And with that in mind, how do you see, Chuck, particularly in your work, the importance of those other spectrums? In particular, I'm very curious to hear about the spectrum of belonging, because the important glue I would anticipate between people in an agile environment, in a learning environment that is shape-shifting, that is also, in many situations, certainly on the ground or in the field, not related to a specific office building or a specific place. How does belonging fit in, and where does that bring people together in that shape-shifting, always learning environment?
I'm going to put a pin in that for about 30 seconds and go back to a point that Bob made about officing, and the office verse. As I read through your book, and I've been educated for over 20 years, I'm thinking it also applies very much to professional military education. It's about education, it's about educating, but also the eduverse. So at the Army War College, we went to a hybrid method of teaching because of the pandemic. We shifted away from in-person. We went to a hybrid method of doing remote learning. And then as soon as the COVID-19 pandemic flushed away, what was our behavior? We went back to what we were doing before. Learning only happens when behavior changes, right? So go back to those things absent, again, the other challenges. This idea of belonging for us, I think, is a very, very important piece. As I read through the Office Shop book and saw your different spectrums, I can make the case in each of those for the U.S. military and the U.S. Army. It's about, again, a sense of identity. Who are you? Why are you here? What can I do? What can I do for a purpose for my colleagues? What can I do for a larger collective? What can I do to make the world better? I think if you go back to the simple question of start with why from Simon Sinek many years ago, why are you involved in this activity? What value can you contribute? And then how can you make not only yourself better, but those who are around you better in the process? Yesterday, the Army just released this new ad campaign. What's old is new again. The new tagline, again, is be all that you can be. With your passion, with your talents, serving a higher purpose, having a ability to improve yourself over time. Those are important things. We talk about diversity, equity, inclusion. The idea that we're trying to get to a sense of appreciation of your uniqueness of who you are, but also your contributions to the overall mission and purpose of the organization, of our society, and that you belong with us, right? And then part of that process, go back to the VUCA that Bob mentioned before in terms of skill set for leaders. Do we understand our role? Can we commit to the direction? And do we recognize that we have a part in creating the future that we would like to see? It comes from that initial vision. It goes to a better understanding. It comes down to a clarity of intent and purpose, an ability to communicate that effectively with members of the organization from the top down to the bottom. And then being agile enough to change our assumptions, challenge our assumptions, change our behavior to make things better for those who are around us and at the same time, better for ourselves.
Very powerful elements to influencing and shaping one's identity. In our part 3 of the book, we encourage everyone to begin by choosing your future self as an individual, your future self as a member of an organization, your future self as a citizen of a community, and being clear about intention, being very gameful in your cooperation and willing to learn. And to your earlier point, wanting to bring others along on a journey to achieve a collective purpose are all very powerful starting points. Bob, there's a question that came in that I think is very relevant to some of the conversation points that you've raised. In organizations that have embraced agility, organizations that are shape-shifting, where have you seen things go wrong? What can we learn from going too far on the end of the spectrum towards shape-shifting?
Yeah, it's a great question, and certainly there are examples. The hardest thing about highly distributed organizations in a VUCA world is keeping that clarity, kind of reminding people of the clarity. And what Chuck said earlier about you can't have certainty, even though you can have clarity, that kind of dilemma between clarity and certainty, and things like quarterly sales pressures and stock prices and all of that, that kind of forces people to make short-term decisions that often don't coincide with the clarity. So I think the biggest challenge, particularly because the present is so noisy and the present is so fast, the biggest challenge is keeping that clarity in the face of the increasingly VUCA world.
And you mentioned the realities of quarterly targets. I would encourage everyone to, if you haven't had the chance, to listen to the talk that we had last Tuesday, with our executive director, Marina Gorbis, where she shared with us the latest research on equitable enterprises and some of the choices that organizations are making on that spectrum of outcomes between profit and prosperity. And I think, Bob, you're raising a very important aspect that is going to make being shape-shifting more challenging. Laura, who asked the question about where things have gone wrong, she's put in another question. I'm just going to read it directly. I think the cat is out of the bag with the office and officing. The silver lining of COVID, in my opinion, is the flexibility people have come to value and expect. There has been a power shift of sorts. I believe it will have a very long tail.
Mm-hmm.
Reactions?
Amen.
So I think it's a long-tailed cat in a room full of rocking chairs, right? Very, very nervous. I think one of the things that here again we might consider about when organizations who are shape-shifting and might fall apart is that when they lose sight of what their values are, they're not clear about their principles, and they don't act to hold people accountable or themselves for those principles and those values. So they lose their way, and they start chasing after those metrics, those profit and loss statements, those other things, those products. And they don't understand here again, it's about people and purpose in the process. And who we are, again, goes back to our values, how we behave as part of our ethos and our ethics. And then the principles that should drive our decision-making should not be a surprise in times of crisis.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and for me, again, repeatedly, when organizations fall off, it's the loss of the values and the principled leadership and the accountability for the purpose.
Right. And the positive about that is those that do understand their values and their purpose and meaning, they're going to be happier, they're going to be healthier, they're going to live longer, and the organizations are going to perform better.
Yeah, very much in our first spectrum on purpose, and what both of you have described, that criticality of having values connected with people and meaning. Bob, you mentioned as well the importance of the principles. We can throw in also our third spectrum of climate, having it connected with the planet as well. And ideally, those are almost pillars to be able to be more agile, to continue the learning and flex in the face of this VUCA world as we aim to create better futures for working and living. Mm-hmm. I want to thank both of you for amazing insights and inspiration as well as we take a look at this last spectrum of agility. We are going to be moving our talks next week into the actual action transformation and actually trying to have a good understanding of what flex of intent looks like in a few different areas. We'll be speaking with Lisa K. Solomon. She is going to be bringing in her perspectives on trying to increase voting for the next generation, or actually the younger generation of new voters and citizens. That's going to be a very interesting conversation. We're also going to be speaking with Shanti Flynn, who is a board member of Barak, which is a nonprofit organization focused on transformation in Bangladesh. So we've got a couple of very interesting conversations which will build on what we've talked about today about agility, but also this idea of transforming and moving forward into preferred futures with flex of intent. So I want to thank again both of you for another great conversation. I want to encourage everyone to check out the upcoming Office Shock talks and also share the recording of this and our other conversations with friends and colleagues. I want to remind everyone, Office Shock was written with the intention of triggering a deeper conversation about the challenges that are being revealed through the changes in workplace. And this, again, I think was another really important contribution to these ongoing conversations. So again, thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Bob. And I wish everyone a wonderful rest of the week.
Thanks for having me. Have a great day. Take care, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.